Welcome to Monday Night Bible Study. You are now free to think, ask questions, so forth, disagree. All those things you're free to do here. Chapter 7 of Genesis. We're starting in tonight as we're going through this study on the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And we've looked at some of the salient, points here as we're going through here. The reason we're doing this is because there are things in the first 11 chapters of Genesis that we need to know and understand in order to give us a solid understanding of really everything else in the Bible. And one of the things that we've pointed out through this study so far is kind of the Genesis-Revelation connection. And you'll notice that a lot of the things that we find here in these first 11 chapters of Genesis, they show up again at the end in the book of Revelation. Because and this is one of the things that struck me years ago, and I thought, everything begins in the beginning. And so for us to understand everything that comes after the beginning, we need to know what happened at the beginning. And I think it's sad that a lot of times people, churches, Bible studies, pastors, teachers, whoever, neglect to go in here and learn and study and teach the early books of Genesis and understand the things that are going on there. A lot of the reason they don't is because there's some controversial things. As I believe, I'm a young earth creationist. I believe that God created the earth in 6 literal days, just like the Bible says. I believe that there was a worldwide flood that destroyed the entire face of the earth and so forth. Lasted about a year. Noah and his family survived it by being in the ark. So anyway, that's where we are now. As we've looked at the construction of the ark. Last time we looked at some of those things. And that's been several weeks ago now. And we're going to pick back up in this study. And as we go into chapter 7, we're going to look at the beginning of the ark. There are a couple of slides that I forgot to put in this PowerPoint that I should have. One of them is a chart I think I handed out here a few weeks ago that gives kind of a chronology of that year of the flood. It tells us, as we'll read through here, the flood started on the 600th year of Noah's life in the 2nd month, like the 17th day and so forth like that. Now, remember that's the 2nd month of Noah's life. Doesn't necessarily mean it was what we would think of as February or something like that. But anyway, you may have one of those. I've got some extra copies in that cabinet over there. I can give you one later. But we'll go ahead and get into this. And one of the things I was going to say is that I'm not going to go way into a lot of the scientific details on the flood and things, because we've kind of been over a lot of that throughout this study for 3 years or so that we've been going through this. So not going to go into a lot of details. We'll talk about some things, some of the more important points. And as always, if you have a question, want to discuss some part of this, feel free to stop me at any time. So all that being said, let's move forward into Genesis chapter 7. Here we go. Verse 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. So we've seen before how Noah walked with God and so forth, and Noah was a righteous man because he had faith. He believed what God told him to do. And here, a few weeks ago in this study, we looked at one aspect of what God told Noah, and that was the gospel to Noah. That was the good news to Noah, was what God told him, is that Noah, the earth is wicked, I'm going to send a flood to destroy the earth, but I'm going to save you and your family and the animals if you follow the instructions that I'm giving you. Build an ark, build it this big, build it this way, so forth. Make these preparations. That was the good news, the gospel to Noah. Noah believed that, and because he believed that, he was considered righteous. And God saved him, physically saved him, and so forth. And, he believed God. He was a righteous man. He walked a man of faith in that generation. Apparently, nobody else was, because nobody else was saved from the flood other than Noah and his family. And with some of the things that Ham did and his descendants, we have to question whether or not, Ham really was a believer or righteous like Noah was. He may not have been, but because he was Noah's son, he was saved from the flood. Okay, God also instructed Noah, of every clean beast thou shalt take unto thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of fowls also the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. So we know that basically he took a male and female pair of every kind of land animal, reptile, creeping things, all those kind of animals. But of the clean animals, they took sevens of them. Now this would have been like what we think of as cows. Those are considered clean animals. Goats, sheep. Right off, I can't think of another clean animal. But anyway, basically like that. Goats, sheep, cows, those are clean animals. So they took more than just 2 of them. There's 7 of them into the ark with them. This also gives us an indication that because of what God had revealed to these people, Noah and then his father Lamech, Methuselah, all the way back down to Adam, God had revealed to them some things about like what kind of animals were clean and what animals were unclean. We know that they made sacrifices. We know that they honored the Sabbath because God told them the Sabbath day was day of rest and so forth. So there were things of what we think of as the law of Moses that apparently they knew these things all the way back there. They may have and probably did have these things written down and followed these laws. And when Moses wrote those things down by God's command and gave them to the nation of Israel, these laws that had been followed before that were set down as God's commandments for them. So anyway, just to make the point that there was the principle of clean beasts and unclean beasts even way back then. And birds, they took all of them too. So they believe, like some of the people, like ICR and different creation research outfits, estimate that there may have been about 16,000 animals, birds and things in the ark. That they took kinds, not that at that time they didn't take like every species of dog and cat and bird and everything, but they took kinds of the animals, the dogs and cats and so forth, and cattle and so forth. The species divided off after that. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. Here's one of the things we need to keep in mind too about the worldwide flood. It was designed for a purpose. It was designed to completely destroy the entire face of the earth. And from a young earth creationist, biblical, literate standpoint, we believe the historical account here is true in every detail. That when the flood came, it was such a catastrophic and cataclysmic event that it totally wiped out the entire surface of the earth, churned it up into a big slurry of sediment, and laid it all back down, and the sediment layers that we see in the earth today. We saw that when we went to Glen Rose, with the dinosaur tracks and the different layers of limestone there. You can see that all over the world, sediment layers that are laid down, rapid deposition and so forth like that. But here's the thing we need to keep in mind, that there was a purpose why God sent the flood. It was to destroy the entire face of the earth and every living thing on it. So it wasn't a matter of just, it rained and rained, the water just came up and it sat there and then it all went back down. No, it was a just churning grinder that just ground everything up into a big mess. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, there went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. So God had said, Noah, 7 days from now, the flood is going to start. Start going into the ark, taking all the animals. Remember, he had told them to gather up food for them and for the animals and store that in the ark as well. Which reminds me, I had some photos I meant to put in this PowerPoint, and I forgot to put those in there too, of some of the details of the model at the Creation Evidence Museum of Dr. Ball's ark model there. So we get a chronology. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. All right, so this we get a chronology there. Now, a lot of time, I know way back, like when I was a kid, I thought, well, Noah's flood, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. So we thought, well, how long did the flood last? 40 days and 40 nights. Noah and his family was in the ark 40 days and 40 nights. Well, how tough could that be? It wouldn't. But then after I, got a little older and started actually reading the Bible and started looking at these dates, it's the 600th year of Noah's life, the 2nd month, the 17th day, and then you follow the narrative, which we'll read that on down there. It'll be in the next chapter. It ends up that Noah and his family were in the ark, and all the animals were in the ark for a year and 10 days. Some people calculated a little different, but from my reckoning, and like I say, my mathematics are not all that good, I reckon a year and 10 days they were in the ark. Because it says on the 601st year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 27th day, they took the covering off and came out of the ark, and so forth. So this gives us an indication, and with the other dates we find that they were in the ark for about a year and 10 days. Also, here's another thing, and this gives us a clue as to really the main reason or the main cause of the catastrophic damage that happened during the flood. Notice it says the fountains of the great deep were broken up. It doesn't say they were broken in. It doesn't say they were broken out. It says they were broken up. So this is going to get into some science here, and I recommend a book. If you ever want to read one of the best books that I've ever read about creation evidence, Noah's flood, it really gets into some pretty good scientific evidence. It's In the Beginning by Walt Brown. Walt Brown is like top scientist. He was a MIT graduate and taught at West Point or somewhere and all kind of things. Really top guy. Anyway, he did his study on this. And Walt Brown's theory is called hydroplate theory. And another thing I forgot tonight, I was going to bring was my globe. So to use that as kind of an illustration. I guess I could draw it on the board, but I'll just try to describe it. Hydroplate theory states that in the pre-flood world, there were subterranean like layers, chambers of water way beneath the ground, and that this water remained in like a supercritical state. It means it was under tremendous pressure, and it was also under tremendous heat. But because it was sealed beneath what we think of as the crust of the earth, that it couldn't escape. So it was like a huge pressure cooker just sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. And then whenever God caused, whatever seismic activity, whatever happened, it caused the fountains of the deep to be broken up. That something, an earthquake shift, something happened that ruptured the crust of the earth and let this superheated, high pressure water just spew out from the crust of the earth. And according to Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, that's what the fountains of the great deep were. Another thing these accomplished was the breaking up of the continents. You know, we've all heard of continental drift and tectonic plate theory and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you take the continents and you look at them on a map, if you move them around, they all somewhat fit together, which shows that, as the Bible teaches, before the flood, all of the landmass of the earth was one landmass. There were seas and things, but there weren't the broken up continents like we have now. The land was all in one mass. Well, hydroplate theory states that when the fountains of the great deep broke up, that broke the landmass apart into basically the different continents, and they began to shift. Let me see, I think I've got a... Well, okay, here's one. Then, matter of fact, this comes from Walt Brown's book. The Mid-Atlantic Rift. Here's kind of a picture of it. You can see this if you've ever, looked at any maps or done much geography or anything. There's this formation out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's one over in the Pacific Ocean too. And I think there's one in the Indian Ocean. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Rift. Now, when scientists discovered this, they realized that this rift is like a crack in the Earth's surface under the ocean that continues to expand. And because of that, that's where now from an evolutionary standpoint, they claim continental drift. That for millions and millions of years, the continents have been drifting apart and so forth like that. But the geologic evidence shows that this happened very rapidly. And on every major continent, you notice that there are mountain ranges along or near the coastlines. So here's in a nutshell a pretty good, probably workable theory about what happened when the fountains of the great deep broke up. These rifts formed in the Earth's crust. This almost like a huge zipper. And when they ruptured apart, this water, super hot, high pressure water, spewed out all the way, into the sky, into the atmosphere. Rained all kind of debris, caused earthquakes, tsunami waves, volcanoes, and all those kind of things all over the world. Probably one of the things that happened in the early stages of the flood were huge, massive tsunami waves. Remember that massive tsunami they had in Indonesia, was it 4 years ago? 4 or 5 years ago? Imagine that in a big enough tsunami wave to go halfway or all the way across the continent. There were probably huge, massive storms that happened. There were probably massive hailstorms that happened. All kind of cataclysmic stuff went on at the beginning of the flood. When the fountains of the great deep were broken up and this huge masses of water began to, boil out from these subterranean chambers. Another thing that it did was it rapidly heated the ocean water. Now, when water heats, it expands. So that also contributed to the flooding of the continents as the ocean water expanded as it heated. A lot of other things that probably happened as a result of that. Heated oceans probably caused the ice age after the flood and so forth. But anyway, not going to get way off into that, but that's just kind of in a nutshell some of the things about probably what happened, and there's a lot of geologic evidence that supports that, about the fountains of the Great Deep being broken up. Any questions or comments? Anybody got anything else on that before we move on? Go ahead.
Just to add humor, that looks like it's a dinosaur.
That, yeah. Kind of does. His tail right there, his legs,
Sure does.
his head down there, yeah. It's the largest dinosaur fossil in
It could happen, you never know.
yeah. And notice it doesn't have feathers. We've been reading this week some, I was looking it up on the Omniology website, Joe Taylor's website. You got a lot of good articles in there about dinosaurs and creation and evolution. And some of the theories about the especially the latest craze in evolution in dinosaurs, that the dinosaurs all turned into birds. That's where the birds came from, and how come there's no dinosaurs? They all turned in, they evolved feathers and turned into birds. So, but anyway, catastrophic damage when Noah's flood started. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. Now, there's a question that's often asked about the flood and about fossils that we find buried in the sediment layers, in the fossil layers. The question is, why don't we find very many mammal fossils? Why don't we find fossils of apes, cows and things like that buried with dinosaurs? Well, the basic reason is because a difference in the sort of physical makeup, physiology of a reptile and a mammal. And this happens when different things happen to reptiles and animals, especially if they drown. Basically, a mammal tends to float on the surface, at least for a period of time, and is generally scavenged by birds and fish and so forth. Reptiles, on the other hand, especially if they drown, they tend to sink to the bottom. So, you can do experiments if you want to do that at home in the bathtub. Try this out if you want to. They tend to sink. Accounts for the reason why we find so many reptile fossils and you don't find very many mammal fossils. However, there are mammal fossils found in areas with dinosaur bones. You don't hear about it because that news is pretty much kept under the rug, but they have been found. But that's why you don't find very many mammals, apes, people, things like that. And too, there's also the factor that the mammals, even apes and people, were smart enough to know that it was, the water was coming up. Especially the people knew it because they had been told that a flood was coming. They had been told that God was going to judge the world for its sin because it was so wicked. God was going to destroy it. They had been told that. And so it wasn't anything they weren't aware of. So those creatures were smart enough to head for higher ground whenever the water started to come up. So of course they died later. So.
In this, we're talking about land animals. With the possibility of all the fish of the seas being killed because of the hot water coming up through there?
Well, apparently a lot of them were, because we find so many fish fossils. There are places in England, I know it's one of the best fish fossil beds in the world, that just layer upon layer upon layer of millions of fish fossils. A lot of them in Oklahoma, you know, fish fossils up there, in a lot of places. So yeah, a lot of the fish were killed in the flood. One of the most famous fish fossils was found in Oklahoma. It's called the Cephactinus. It's a 14-foot fish, and inside the skeleton of that fish is a complete skeleton of a smaller fish. That this 14-foot Cephactinus had apparently eaten this fish before it could digest that fish. It was buried, rapidly buried and fossilized. So, a number of the, I don't know if we could, you know, don't know if majority of the fish survived, but yeah, a lot of the fish survived the flood because, you know, they didn't take them on the ark. So yeah, a lot of them survived. Probably even things like the whales and things like that. All aquatic animals, you know, maybe mammals, maybe things like, maybe even seals and things like that may have survived without being on the ark because they could live in the sea. Would think you probably took those like seals and walrus and stuff like that. May have taken them on the ark because they are basically a land animal, although they can live in the sea too. So probably, yeah, sea dwellers like fish, sharks, whales, they probably, you know, probably survived in the water, at least enough of them to, you know, to survive after the flood. They're for the species to survive. Now we do know that a lot of the whales died in the flood because down in Chile, I think it's Chile, it's Peru, Chile, I think, they found fossil layers with a number of whale skeletons, complete whale skeletons, fossil skeletons that are buried in, you know, rapidly deposited sand deposits. Of course, evolutionists have a completely different explanation for that, but it's obvious that they were buried in, you know, rapidly deposited sediment. So, yeah, I think a lot of the water animals survived. Probably a lot of the insects and things like that, just they survived, you know, because they could live on. I mean, you think about it, during the flood, you know, there were huge floating mats of trees and vegetation and, you know, dead animals and people, and, you know, it was a mess out there. And so probably a lot of the insects and things like that, you know, survived just out there on the water. I know at least enough of them to perpetuate the species.
Carson, you know, you were talking about the fishes, how some of them in the deep survived, some didn't. If you notice that when you heat water, the oxygen goes out of it. And so that probably within itself, because of the turmoil of the deep, could be the side effect of that would take care of the fishes because they couldn't.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that is an important element of what, you know, people believe in Noah's flood believe is that, yeah, the heating of the water and all of the sediment in there basically wiped out the oxygen content, or
they call it heavy
clouded the water, or the oxygen content in the water, and the reason so many fish just fell to the bottom and covered up, they couldn't breathe, you know. So yeah, that's a good point, and that's more than likely one of the components that happened to the water during the flood. And there were areas where the water, I'm sure, was, you know, super hot around these vents that were spewing out this hot water. It just, you know, was almost to the boiling point where nothing could survive it, and they got buried. So, did you have something, Steve? No.
You know, along the same lines, you know, the deepest part of the oceans, or that's what they call the deep, is over off of New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah.
That's where one of the planes that went down first of the year.
Yeah, MH370. Yeah.
It's amazing how the depths of what we don't know about what's on the ocean floor could be a heavy contribution to what actually happened during the flood and the turning of the earth.
And if you, it's one reason I wish I'd have brought my globe, forgot it. But if you look at the globe, or you look at the, you know, map of the oceans, in the Atlantic Ocean, where we have this mid-Atlantic ridge, it's like, I mean, it looks flat here, but it forms kind of almost a ridge in the Atlantic Ocean. Now, like a mountain ridge, that's basically what it is. Now, on the other side of the world, in the Pacific Ocean, there are trenches over there. So it's almost like when this part of the Earth's surface rose, it drew the other end. And all of those trenches that occur over there, like the Marianas Trench and all those, they follow a certain pattern, and you figure those in with the geology of the sea mounts and underwater volcanoes and all the things that are happening over there in that, you know, Pacific Rim, Ring of Fire. It's pretty easy to see that apparently the Pacific Ocean basin just sunk in. So most creationists believe that the ocean floors or the oceans were a lot shallower before the flood, and because of some of the geologic things that happened, the oceans were deeper after the flood, and that's where all the water went. They ran back in the ocean eventually. So it went over the animals. They went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him. And the Lord shut him in. So, you know, this is interesting. Did Noah make the door so big that he, you know, it would have taken God to shut him? You know, probably not. I mean, they were planning on going in there and shutting the door. I heard a kind of a theory or an explanation for this. How come God shut him in? Don't know whether this is the case or not, but it could be. Here's a little speculation. Noah was a righteous man. He had preached to these people for all of his life, 600 years almost. He knew, you know, and especially after God told him 120 years, I'm going to destroy the world. Well, when that loud boom and the ground shook and water began to shoot out of these jets and the sky turned dark and it started to thunder and lightning and pour rain. I mean, think about it. You know, we talk about the fountains of the great deep bursting up. Think about the rain. This is worldwide rain, just probably pouring hurricane downpour rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Probably coincident with the breaking up of the, you know, fountains of the deep and all that. Work together, probably. But anyway, when all that began to happen, and those people realized, hey, Noah knew what he was talking about. God's going to judge the world. You know, we're all going to die in this flood. Well, I'm sure we always see the people running up and banging on the ark. Hey, Noah, let us in, let us in. You know, we repent now. We believe you now, Noah. See, you knew what you were talking about. Well, the thing is, Noah may have let him in, you know. So that's, you know, it's kind of a poignant statement there. It says the Lord shut him in. When everybody was in there, it was time. Boom, the door was shut and it was sealed and they weren't coming out and nobody was getting in. You know, and it's an interesting thing too, which we'll get to it in like a next chapter or so. After they land, after all that time, they sent the birds out and they came back and all that. And they realized the flood was gone and the earth was dry and they could leave the ark. It says that Noah took the covering off the ark and they went out. So somehow or other, when God shut that door, there was no opening that door. They didn't open that door and go out through that door. They had to go in there and, you know, knock the planks off the ark to get out. So anyway, I'm sure that, you know, you could draw some interesting conclusions from all that, but interesting thing there. And you know, God did that to judge the world. Most people today in the world probably don't believe that the flood happened. You know, I believe it not just, well, I believe it because I believe God's word is true. Now, yeah, it's a matter of faith. I choose to believe that. But I see all around me, everywhere I go, and I've extensively traveled the world, but everywhere I have been, I see evidence everywhere that testifies of the truth of this account. I believe the evidence is left behind to this worldwide flood. And we see it all around. So, animals went in, Noah and all the people went in, and God shut the door. The flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased, bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. And the waters prevailed and were increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed exceedingly. That phrase right there, prevailed exceedingly, means that, like, prevail is a word that means to deliberately try to overcome something or overtake something. So even the waters, as God's agent at that time of destruction on the earth, were like they deliberately were set about to fulfill God's will, to completely destroy the earth and wipe out everything, every living thing on it. They prevailed exceedingly upon the earth. It was a catastrophic destruction, this churning mass of water and sediment and all these things for probably 40 days and 40 nights. Maybe after the 40 days and 40 nights, things may have begun to kind of settle down and settle out. But it says, upon the earth and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. Now, the mountains in the pre-flood world probably weren't as high as the mountains we have now. Because the mountains we have now, here again, geologic evidence, they show evidence of being really very new, very young. And like I said, if you look around the edge of every major continent, there's mountain range there. And probably what happened is, as the earth landmass broke apart and shifted during the flood, at some point they came to a stop. And when that landmass came to a stop and these things began to settle where they were, it shoved up these mountain ranges around the edges of the continents, some in the middle of the continents and so forth. But the mountains we have now weren't here then. They were formed as, like Mount Everest and all these mountain chains, they were formed as a result of the flood and the continental shift that happened rapidly during the flood. But it also states here that this covered everything under the whole heaven. There's a theory now, well, it's been around for quite a while, not just in academia, but also in a lot of religious circles, a lot of the religious eggheads and so forth, professors and whatnot. They claim that, well, it wasn't a worldwide flood. It was just a localized flood right there close around where Noah lived, but it didn't affect the whole world. Well, the Bible says it covered the whole world. So I'm going to go with the Bible. The eggheads can come up with their theories if they want to. I'm going to go with the Bible, especially when that's what the evidence shows. There was a worldwide flood. We live well close to the limestone that's called the Austin chalk. That almost kind of white, varying thickness layers of limestone, prominent in Texas. Well, you can find that same chalk layer in, I think, every continent of the world. You've heard of the white, you may have seen, anybody been to England, seen the White Cliffs of Dover? White Cliffs of Dover, Austin chalk. You go to Israel, prominent, you can see those white layers. In fact, where we excavated Tel Asafi, it's called the White Tel. It's because it's built on a shining, glaring layer of white Austin chalk. It's all over the world. This same sediment layer, worldwide. And that's not the only one. There are others too. So these things show that it covered the whole world, the flood did. It wasn't just a localized flood.
Carson, I was in 1983, I had to go to South Africa on business. And there's at the point, I don't know where it's Cape Horn or
Good Hope.
Good Hope, is that in South Africa?
South
Africa. And there's a place called Table Mountain,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a sheer mountain that rises 3,000 foot
Wow.
from the ocean to the top.
Mhm.
And that was an experience going up there.
I bet.
You could see the difference of the layers of the stone going
Yeah.
through there.
Huh.
And there was some, what we call limestone.
Yeah.
The white
Yeah.
chalky stuff.
Yeah, wow. You didn't base jump off of it?
I couldn't, listen, I got back, there was pictures of me, it had this thing on the picture, says something obstructed the view. It was a guardrail, I couldn't get close enough, I couldn't.
Yeah.
My feet wouldn't let me get up there. But
Man. Yeah, I'm not real big on heights and stuff either. Anyway, kind of an artist rendition of Noah's Ark and the flood and some of the storms and things going on there. And one of the things I didn't notice till after I put this in the PowerPoint, there's a dinosaur right there under the water. See?
There it is. Backstroking, right?
Yeah, and I looked in here, I didn't see any other, there's probably hidden pictures in there, I didn't see any other. But anyway, so this is, we get the picture, the cartoonish picture of Noah in a little boat with giraffes sticking out, and they're just kind of floating along. It wasn't like that. This was not a Caribbean cruise. I mean, there was nothing fun about this. The Ark was designed as a survival tool. We hear a lot about survival stuff today. Well, this was a survival tool designed for them and the animals to survive this flood, and they all did. Now I think the hand of God was there to preserve them.
That's right.
Divine protection, but there's also the factor of that Noah did what God told him to do. And he did it the way God told him to do it. And so they all survived. He didn't cut any corners. He didn't, do anything, cut costs or whatever. He built it the way God told him to do. And they survived. So they made it. And all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land, died. And every living substance was destroyed, which is upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle and creeping things, and the fowl of the heaven, and they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So, 40 days and 40 nights. For 150 days, during this 150-day period, it's not like it, rained for 40 days and 40 nights and the fountains of the great deep were broken up and they settled out. This went on, at least the churning of the water, and probably storms and tsunamis and earthquakes and all these kind of things. Churning waters, storms for 150 days. So imagine that, being in this, it was like this, Well, we know it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. There probably still were rainstorms after that, just not, widespread over the earth like it was for 40 days and 40 nights. But for 150 days, man, they rocked and churned and, and rode that ark. And the thing is that, the things that humans and animals would suffer through in 150 days in a churning, rocking boat for seasickness and everything, yeah, it happened. We like to think that, well, all that stuff didn't happen. It happened. They all survived, but that's about it. For 150 days. So it prevailed upon the earth for that period of time. All right, next time we'll go into chapter 8 as we move through this, and I'm glad we're in this study. I'm excited about where we're going to go after this, because we've got some good things to do and important things to look at after we get through this study. So we'll be done with this in a few weeks through Genesis 11. and then we'll move on probably into some things in the book of Romans, so that'll be good. All right, anybody got any questions, comments, or anything? Other theories or anything about the flood?
Can you imagine what it would have been like in the ark? Just survival.
Yeah,
But at the same token, God provided.
yeah,
He gave them the protection and gave them the promise that just write it out. This is what we have done for you.
yeah. You know, and they didn't know how long it was going to be.
Yeah, they had a blank sheet.
They didn't know whether they were going to be in there for
2 days or
2 days or 2 years.
That's right. Exactly.
You know, and imagine that after, say, that 150 days, when things began to kind of die down and so forth, we're assuming, because it says there was a window in the ark, we're assuming that they could look out, you know. I guess they could. You know, we kind of get the idea that the window in the ark was like a hatchway in the top, that if they opened it, they could look up, but they, for some reason, couldn't look out and see. I think they could, because it says, you know, at one point the mountaintops were visible and so forth. So they had to be able to see them, look out and see them. So think about after it's settled down enough where they could look out over and nothing but just water as far as they could see. Stuff floating out there, and you know, and
You really wouldn't want to stick your head out the window because it's decaying matter out there.
Yeah.
It would knock you flat anyway.
yeah. I mean, it stunk. It stunk inside the ark and it stunk outside the ark. There was, you know, the thing is, it was an ugly situation. I mean, devastatingly stinking, ugly, bad situation during that, you know, flood, stuff floating around.
Let's stop at the same time.
You know?
Think of what the world was like at that time,
Yeah,
and how do you start over? You have to sacrifice. You
Yeah.
have to suffer.
mm-hmm.
You have to and just basically make the ordeal
Yeah,
workable, because that's God had his way of saying, this is it, we're starting over,
Yeah.
wipe the slate
push
clean.
the reset
start over.
button. Yeah.
Hit the reset button.
Yeah. And, all right, there apparently was about 1,656 years from Adam to the flood. Okay, now we know from the biblical account that early they developed metalworking industry, musical instruments. So they had mathematics and science and industry and things like that. So there's no telling how advanced their culture and society was. It's possible that they may have been more advanced than we are today. We don't know. You know, maybe they were, maybe not. You know, we've got this idea that they're all very primitive, but that may not necessarily be the case. So, like you say, when Noah and his family landed and they came out of the ark, I mean, they basically started over with nothing.
That's right.
It basically Stone Age level. It'd be like, okay, let's say all of us were, I don't know, marooned on some island somewhere, you know, and there was nothing there. Okay, well, you take the collected knowledge and skills of everyone in this room. You take all of our collected experience, from technological experience to everything that we've all done in here. Stick us on an island with nothing, and we're instantly back to the Stone Age.
Back to square one.
Yeah, because I couldn't make that plastic cup to save my life. I don't know how. It's a simple, plastic cup. We throw it away. So, the accumulated knowledge they had, but they still had to start all over in a, literally new world. And so,
But just think about it, Bob and I would be in a new world because there'd be no computers.
no
right, Bob?
computers,
No need. No use.
We don't need you guys.
That's right. We don't need you guys.
Leave me a fishing pole.
yeah.
Fishing pole, I can do that.
There you go.
You not only think about what it was like on the ark, but like you're saying, I think a lot about when they actually left. I mean, they had to have wondered, where are we?
Yeah.
Just,
Well,
it had to be mind blowing.
this is speculation on my part. I think that when they landed, they had a pretty good idea of where they were by the stars.
Yeah.
Because they, you know, in ancient times they knew and they understood and practiced star mapping, you know, and so by navigating by the stars, they had a pretty good idea of where in the world they were by the stars they could see and so forth. So they may not have been able to pinpoint it, but they may have had a pretty good idea, you know, of where they were in the world from the stars. So, but still, I mean, when they came out of the ark, I'm sure they wondered, is there anything left? And you know, it's just speculation on my part, but I think that after they began to, you know, multiply and so forth, and tribes, societies of them, you know, some of those guys began to kind of grow up. I think they got in groups and went all over the world looking. I think they sent out, you know, like explorers. Let's go see if there's anything left anywhere in the world. And I think at that time, because the ocean waters hadn't come up quite all the way yet, they could travel across the continents and so forth. And anyway, they may have looked around. They came back after a while and they said, "There's nothing left. There's nobody, no cities, no civilization, nothing. There's nobody in the world. It's just us.
No Walmarts.
No Walmarts, yeah, nothing anywhere in the world."
Well, they had their cows, so I mean, that was sustaining.
Yeah.
Do you think the flood not only just destroyed the earth, but it cleansed it?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a cleansing process.
Yeah. I think so, because, you know, one of the reasons that we looked at that the earth was under such a curse and that the earth itself was considered corrupt was because of all of the blood that had been shed, you know, on the earth. It's like Abel's blood that cried out to God from the earth. So probably because of all that innocent blood that had been shed and corrupted the earth, yeah, I think that's one reason God destroyed all of that, to cleanse it, just to, you know, remake it and reform it.
Well, you stop and think, you know, the earth sufficed the requirements of man, oxygen, water, and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Think about the other planets in our solar system. There was none that would sustain life as well as what Earth did. So he says, okay, we're going to hit the reset button, wipe it clean, and start over.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, we think, well, why didn't God just completely wipe out the human race, completely destroy the earth, and just start over the whole completely new earth? Well, there's reasons why he did it.
Yeah, right.
It's because it was his possession.
Right.
It was his possession. It was his creation and his possession. You know, and so anyway, and this goes into God's whole plan and purpose for why he, you know, just cleansed the earth, reset it, started over with Noah, and so goes into this whole plan and purpose. And these are some of the things we're going to look at in our next study as we after we finish this one. Anybody else?
It's the earth, you know, they kill all these people, you know, that are Christians.
Mm-hmm.
They're righteous, they're killed, their blood is shed.
Mhm.
So is the earth still?
Well, it's going back to the same status that it was back in the early days.
Yeah.
I see.
Paul, let's see if I can find it right quick. Paul mentioned that over in Romans. Let me look, I think, see if I can find that. Well, that's not right here where anyway, y'all will recognize the scriptures when I say it. The section where Paul says even the creation groans until today. Well, okay, that even the physical creation, you know, groans under the burden of man's sin and under the curse that it's under. So even God's creation is waiting for its redemption, because another reason why God didn't just completely destroy the earth and start all completely over with a whole new one is because He's not just redeeming people, He's going to redeem the earth too. He's going to cleanse it. You know, Peter said it's going to be cleansed by fire next time. And also, when Israel becomes the head of the nations, and they will enter their kingdom as an undefiled people. And that undefiled people will then have a huge part in the spiritual cleansing of the earth. And it's to have a part in the redemption of the earth. So these are all, you know, things that are part of God's overall plan and purpose for the earth. And purpose for Israel. And then He has a purpose for us too, the body of Christ. It's in the heavenly places because, you know, there's the heavens and the earth. And He's going to use Israel to redeem the earth. They'll be the head of the nations and the kingdom on earth. Our place will be in the heavenly places. As Paul said, our conversations in heaven. We're seated with Christ in heavenly places and so forth. So He will redeem the earth as well. All right. Anybody else? All right. Good to see everybody tonight. Everybody stay warm. It's supposed to be cold this week and all that. Let's have a word of prayer and we'll be dismissed.